Alright, and now at this stage you should have your canvas completely toned in with the toning or muting layer. And again, you want to make sure it's dry to the touch, and you don't need to overdo it. 1 or 2 layers is enough. It doesn't have to mute your sketch that much. So again, you just want to make sure that you use just enough pigment in that layer to just slightly color the sketch and slightly mute it down, make it a little bit softer. And that's what we're going for with that layer. But now that that's done, what we want to do is actually apply some color. So it's time to dive in here. I have the colors in my palette. Now I am using this palette for another painting I'm working on, so it's a little bit messy here. But what I have is raw umber dark, raw sienna, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, naphthol crimson, pyrrole orange, or it's also called organic orange. I call it pyrrole red orange because it's really a red orange in color, Indian yellow, and then titanium white. And in the middle, I'm going to put some matte medium, a large copious amount of that. And again, I like to use Nova Color matte medium. You can use Liquitex. Those are the 2 brands I recommend. There might be some other ones out there that'll work. You'll have to test and see. But you'll get good results with either Liquitex or Nova Color. So what I want to do, actually, before I start painting, this is a new session here. I'm going to ask a quick blessing because I had to take a break between the last stage and this stage while I was waiting for it to dry. So Father, bless the painting process. You know, Lord, I can't do it apart from you. But with you, Lord, I can do all things, and I know my students can as well. Bless this painting process. Help me to capture just at this stage what is needed, the contrast and values, and help the students as well just to begin their paintings with confidence and guide them every step of the way in this process, Lord, for your glory and for their benefit of being able to paint a portrait they can be proud of. I ask in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I'm going to take my 1-inch flat. It's actually an angled flat, and I like this brush because it allows me to tip it and get the corners. You know, I can do a large area, but I can also cut in really well and get some tight areas on here. So I'm going to start by taking some raw umber dark. So just a little bit of raw umber dark on the corner of my brush. And I'm going to place it right next to my dollop of matte medium. And I'm just going to blend into that a little bit. And I'm going to take a little bit of ultramarine blue, these 2 colors. All right, we're just going to kind of mix them together. And we're going to make a warm gray. We want to have just a little more raw umber dark than ultramarine blue, but 50-50 will be fine. Just think of 50-50 mixture of those 2 pigments. And then we're going to mix this together. So we're just going to mix it together like this on our palette. Really get a nice, great mixture. And then what I like to do is take a piece of white cardstock. I call this my white card, and I just kind of test out the glaze on that, see what it looks like. I'll show you what that looks like. It's pretty translucent at this point. I'm going to actually thin it out just a bit more. What we're shooting for is something that's maybe about 90% translucent or transparent. Transparent actually means you can see through it completely. Opaque means you can't see through it at all. And translucent is kind of halfway between the 2. But we're shooting for about 90% matte medium, 10% pigment, or even 95% medium and 5% pigment. We're looking for something really light like this, okay, that just barely makes a difference, so that you can see it on your canvas, but it's really not going to affect the color that much. Because again, with this technique, what we're trying to do is to slowly bring the painting to completion, to basically take a sketch and slowly transition it, slowly segue it into a completed painting, kind of like a Polaroid photograph. And I've explained this before, but you remember the old Polaroid photographs where you had, you know, that piece of film and it would come out of the end of the camera, and you'd hold it and it would take about 30 seconds and you'd slowly see an image materialize before your eyes. Well, that's the way we're doing this painting here. We're using the classical glazing technique like Da Vinci and Titian and Vermeer, those artists from the Renaissance time. And we're doing a sfumato glazing technique where light is allowed to shine through your glaze, reflects off the white of the canvas, and then through the glaze again and back to your eye. And because the pigment is suspended between the clear layers of matte medium, the light actually can activate off the pieces of pigment, and it intensifies the color. It makes it way more luminous, and it gives your painting more depth as well. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're going very light, so if you make any mistakes, it's super easy to overcome because it's light, and you can just adjust it in the next layer. So let's go ahead and take this mixture that we have here, and we're just going to want to get some immediate contrast right away. So let's identify the value structure. Don't worry so much about color, the skin tones, that'll come later. Right now, let's just identify the major differences in tonal value and begin to establish that as soon as we can. So I'm going to start here in the lower left corner and just block this color in. Just block this color in right around the edge of her clothing. And you can see we're going super light. And I'm not going to go all the way up into the background. I'm only going to go just a little bit. I'm going to go probably about up to her lips, that area here. Now I just flipped my brush over to get a little more pigment off of it, so that's a good technique. And you don't want to overbrush it, but we're brushing several times, and then we're just lightly dragging the brush at the end to get a bit of a gradation there. Now you'll just barely see a difference, but I'd like you to start off a little lighter than what you think you should go. And that's one of the most challenging aspects of this technique, is just really getting that light touch. Now I'm applying another glaze and I'm looking at the background, I'm identifying where that shift in value occurs. Okay, and it occurs just a little bit left of her eye and actually a bit above the eye. And there's a little shape that I'm looking for, and it's kind of like an apostrophe almost. So this little apostrophe shape, I missed that on the camera, I'm sorry, it was right here that I placed that. But I am adding a glaze right to the top, and I'm cutting it around her hair. And I'm going to bring that glaze just to the edge right here so it comes up kind of in between her eyes. That's about how far it goes, but I leave off on this area right there. And I'm going to bring the glaze all the way around, all the way down. And we're going to go just to the right side of her hair here. I'm not going to glaze into the hair because there's color I need to preserve, and it's got a warmer tone, so I'm not going to really glaze into the hair, but rather around it. So I'm just going to use some diagonal strokes to smooth this out, and again I'm cutting up to the edge around the hair, not painting on top of it at this point. Okay, so that's a layer for the background, just to isolate that color, get a little bit of the shading in the background, get some differentiation in the tones. We have it lighter up here on the top and then darker down here on the right hand side and on the bottom. So now let's switch brushes, and let's go with this smaller. This is a size 14 flat, maybe about 3/4 to a 1/2 inch. And we're going to block in, using the similar color, we're going to block in some values for her hair and her eyes and any other darker values. We're going to identify those dark values in the painting, and then we're going to start glazing those in simultaneously. So I'm going to need to mix more of this glaze. Let's take more Ombre Dark, and ultramarine blue. Again, we'll just mix that together. Just a little bit here, and then we start mixing it into the dollop of matte medium slowly. You don't want to mix it into the whole amount, but rather just swirl it around, and that way you can control the opacity of your glaze. Alright, so we're really just controlling the amount, slowly making it a little more translucent. And here we might get just a bit more opaque than we did for the glaze on the background, just because we're using a smaller brush and it's going to be a slightly thinner layer. And let's test this out on the white card and see what that looks like in relationship to the previous glaze. Yeah, it's just a little bit darker. I think that'll work. We'll test this out on our canvas. And we're going to just start blocking in up here on the top of her hair. And we're looking for those shadow shapes. So I'm just following the shapes that I created during the sketching process. And that's why it was so important to delineate your values, to identify those values, the shapes of those values within your reference photo, and plot them out and shade them in a little bit so you know where to go with the glazes. It's kind of like a road map. It makes it way, way easier. And I'm using a 45, almost 45 degree angle with my brush and flowing it along with the directional strokes of the hair. Now I'm going to turn the brush down at this angle. It's still at a 45, but I'm basically just allowing the flat, the wide edge of the brush to cover a larger distance. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of a glaze to the top of the hair, and now let's add in a glaze for this lower portion. And I've changed the angle of the brush, so instead of having it tilt this way at a 45, now it's tilting the other way at a 45 degree angle. And that allows me to get more directional control. I can use the point of it just to block in these little skinny triangular shapes in her hair, which are a lot of fun. And we can use the wide portion of it to block in those larger areas as well. So I'm going to continue down. But again, notice how I'm leaving off on these lighter areas, because we want to preserve that area for the more vibrant colors. Now keep in mind, shadows typically are darker in value, but then the areas that are lighter in value are typically more vibrant in color. So we want to preserve the luminosity. That's what I call it, preserve the luminosity. So we don't want to glaze into these areas up here. And we don't want to even really think about the color in these areas at this point. Right now, all we want to do is just establish this initial value structure. That's it. So let's glaze in the back part of her hair. And again, notice the angle of my brush. I'm cutting in around this lock of hair right here above her ear, turning my brush, get these fun little angles around the back. I flipped my brush over because I exhausted the paint supply on the one side, but there's almost always some paint on the opposite side of your brush. And then if you drag it where you keep the brush at a little more of a parallel angle to your canvas, you'll kind of pull off more paint from your brush that way and extend the usability of your brush in between loading it up with more paint from your palette. Alright, so we got these shapes identified and blocked in. Let's make sure we don't neglect this little strand of hair on. I'll have to wipe off my brush. I had a little too much paint on there. But we don't want to neglect this little strand of hair on the side of her face. Some shadows there we can capture. I just use my finger if I, went too far over the lines. And I just wipe it off on a towel or whatever. It's acrylic, it's non-toxic, so no big deal. Just continue this glaze down. Block in these little fun shapes for her hair. Again, I'm just following the shadow forms that I've delineated. So if you really pay attention to those value structures you created, it'll really help you out. I use a metaphor of like nations and states. I'll talk about that more in some future lessons, but each shadow kind of occupies its own geographical territory. It creates a specific shape within the larger context of a certain area. And you want to see those specific shapes, the amount of space they occupy, and the specific border line, because it'll have its own little contours and cragginess, just like the border of a state or a province, which typically follow rivers and things like that. So look for those shapes and try to identify them and put your glazes right in those areas. Hopefully you did most of the heavy lifting, the major work in your sketch, but if not, you can always touch it up and dial in those nuances in the painting stage. Now let's add some glazes to her face. Alright, let's use this size 10 round, and we're going to just add a bit more raw umber dark to this because the glaze is getting used up, and a little more ultramarine blue, just kind of freshen this up a little bit. Let's go ahead, and this one is going to be just a bit more opaque than our other ones. I'll show you here on the white card, just a little bit more opaque. It's still very, very translucent. And let's add a glaze to her eyebrows. And let's add a glaze to her eyes. We're just going to kind of darken them in a little bit. A little bit more raw umber dark. I want this glaze to be just a bit warmer. Okay, I'm going to glaze the side of her forehead. And a round brush, you should be using a larger one like a size 10. You can get some fantastic brushes from Hobby Lobby. I really, really enjoy these. The Artist Brush Set by Fine Touch. Very inexpensive, and they're nice. I believe golden Taklon synthetic bristles. Yeah, if you go with this set here, it'll pretty much be everything you need to paint along with this. But anyway, you'll want to just continue adding some glazes here to your shadowed areas. And this round brush will give you quite a bit of dexterity. And if you're going light enough, it should apply well. Now you could use a flat brush as well if that seems better to you. I just like having the control of this round brush so I can really cut in around certain shapes. I can cut in, around her nose. And I'm applying it just in these darker values. In fact, I probably should leave off in that edge of the nostril. That's a warmer color. I should just really concentrate on the darker values, any values that are a little bit cooler in tone. So I'm going to add that just to the edge of her lip, not the entire portion, but the bottom portion of her top lip and just on the left hand side right here, just that area. Then I'm going to also add a little bit of a glaze to the middle portion between her lips. And I'm going to also add a little bit of a glaze to her eyebrows, but more on the left hand side because this side here on the right should be a little lighter in value. And again, I want to add a glaze to, let's see, the upper and lower eyelid fold, the eyes. So this is raw umber dark with a little bit of ultramarine blue. It's a mixture of the two, but it's probably 2/3 raw umber dark and 1/3 ultramarine blue at this point. And I'm just going over the eye and the upper and lower eyelid folds. One of the things I've noticed with beginning artists is they tend to really want to paint in the eyes right away, but they neglect the dark values around the eyelid folds. So when you're painting, paint them simultaneously if you can. Sometimes the eyes are blue and so you can't do that, but typically they're not as blue as what we think, and you will be able to do both of them at the same time. Alright, let's add a bit of a shadow underneath her neck area. Again, I'm just going to bring that glaze in, not super far. I'm looking at the reference photo and I think I'll basically just stop it off at this point, about where I have the shading delineated. And maybe I'll add just a little bit of a glaze to the underside of her jawline here, but I'm not going to add it up there because that color should be a little warmer in tone. I think I did add a bit of a glaze right under her lip because that is darker in value. And that I can get away with doing. I'm just going to refine the edge of her hair here, the shadow under her earlobe. And at this stage too, I could also block in some values for her clothing. And with that, we'll finish up this particular lesson. And there's a lot more we need to do, but I don't want this lesson to go too long. So I'm going to finish up here by just adding some glazes to the lace. Okay, now on the top part of her lace, this area here is lighter in value. She might have an undershirt there or something. This is darker in tone because we're seeing her skin through, you know, the tulle fabric, that kind of transparent or translucent fabric. And so I'm going to use this kind of warm raw umber dark glaze for that. I'm going to add a little more raw umber dark to this mix, just to that same area. I'm not creating a whole new mixture. It has a bit of ultramarine blue. Now it's probably at a ratio of a quarter ultramarine blue and 75% raw umber dark. So let's add the glaze in, and I'm going to start right here. This area I'm going to leave off on because that, again, is not her skin showing through, so I want to have that distinction in value. Try to keep it pretty simple. It's okay if you go over your lines because you can see your sketch through the layer. It's very translucent at this point, so just block it in. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to try to see these major distinctions in value. I am looking at the reference photo quite a bit. And I do recommend that you look at your reference photo at least 50% of the time, because that way then you'll be painting what you see and not what you think you see. So I'm using this round brush, is size 10, and I'm just going over all my areas that are shaded in. And man, oh man, there's some fantastic sketches that the students have been doing in our group. You're probably one of them. And the lace, the detail in the lace, I am just blown away by the dedication that the the students have put in to really make the lace look fantastic. So I know that you know, you probably have some really good detail in the lace. You'll be able to follow that super well. Just go over what you have sketched and block it right in. But again, you don't have to be super precise. I'm just gonna see where I should stop off here. Yep, we're gonna bring it down below, and I'm gonna make the lace a little bit looser at the bottom. Like, I'm gonna put more detail on the top, but as I get toward the bottom edge of the portrait, I'm going to not make it quite as tight, not as precise in detail. That way we'll have more visual focus up here on the top. This will be our focal point. Okay, and now I'll add a little bit of a glaze to this right hand side, because I can kind of see through that as well. Just block that in. And then also a little bit underneath there as well. Lastly, we'll take just a bit of ultramarine blue and add it to this glaze. See how I can just pull it from this mixture I have up here? Super convenient. Then I don't have to grab for more from my main colors on the side. But I'm going to add just a couple of dark glazes right underneath these wrinkles here. Okay, so we're looking for the wrinkles in her clothing. And just adding a couple dark values for that. And another wrinkle right here, block that in. Just using some kind of short choppy strokes. And let's also add this slightly cooler tone, a little more ultramarine blue to the mix. I'll show you what it looks like on the white card. You can see maybe a little difference in the tone. But I'm going to just add that glaze to the top. I want to dilute it a bit, add a little more matte medium to the mix, and let's just add a bit of a glaze to the top here, because that shadow is kind of dark. I do want to capture that, but I'm going to leave off on these other areas for now and come back to those later. Okay, and I think this will be a good stopping point here. So we just basically have the first few layers. Let me just quick add a little raw umber dark-ish glaze to her ear, because that should get a little darker in value. Missed that spot. Okay, and a little bit of a glaze to the interior of her hair. And that's good. So I'm going to stop off here, and this is where we're at. Let's just finish up here with a little bit of a raw umber dark glaze right under her ear. Don't want to neglect that. And I think with that I'm going to call, at least for this stage, we're going to call the painting done. Well, just for this stage. We're going to call this lesson done here. And we've got everything blocked in. That first glaze just to identify the major value structure in the painting and to move it along in the direction we want to take it. Again, we want to see light, we want to see the forms. Skin tones and color can come later. All right, so let's build up that foundation, build up that structure, placing those values just in the right place. Those initial glazes, just to block in those values as precisely as we can without going overboard. And this is what we have. So I really look forward to teaching you the next step, where we're going to be adding some more color. We're going to be working in some tones for her face, just beginning to get the foundations for the skin tones, and we'll be adding more layers to the background as well. But hey, thank you so much for taking part in this challenge. Again, if you're not signed up, go to realisticacrylic.com. Right at the top there, you'll see a bar that says learn more about the challenge. You can click that and sign up. And we'd love to have you in this challenge here, painting along with us. Again, I commend you if you are taking the challenge. I commend you for the effort, the work you're putting in. It shows, and your sketches are beautiful. So just continue the process. I look forward to seeing your continued work here in this challenge. God bless, and we'll see you in the next lesson.